So welcome back to the next part of the lecture about the cells. And in this part, we will be studying about the different components of the cells. The cells are basically made up of three different components. Let me take help from the note. Okay. So typically a cell is made up of, let me use the other one. Okay, this one. A cell is made up of an outer boundary, and that outer boundary is called as the cell membrane. This is called as the cell membrane. There exists another central component within the cell. I'm talking about the eukaryotic cell, and that component is called as the nucleus. The outermost boundary of the cell is called as the cell membrane, while a big nucleus is typically present within the eukaryotic cell. Everything in between these two is called as the cytoplasm. It's called as the cytoplasm. And together, these things made protoplasm. Protoplasm is like the living matter. So these are the living matter. All the organelles and components of the cells are present within the cytoplasm. So we will be studying about the cell membrane, and then about the cytoplasm and the components present in the cytoplasm, and then we will be studying about the nucleus. We'll see their structures as well as their functions. There is one more interesting thing you should remember right at the start, that in case of the plant cells, there exists a nucleus, a cell membrane. So here exists the cell membrane. There exists a nucleus. In addition to the cell membrane, the plant cells contains an additional layer outside the cell membrane, which is called as the cell wall. There exists more differences between the animal cells and the plant cells, and we will look into these differences in the upcoming slides. But just I want you to remember these two typical difference between the two types of the cells. Okay, so let me take you back to the slide. So these are the different parts of the cells. And the cells contains the most important thing the cell is carrying is the genetic material, is the things enclosed within the nucleus called as DNA. And this is an organism with different cells, and they are present in a different dividing states: anaphase, metaphase, interphase. These are the different phases of the cell division, and you don't need to worry about all these cell divisions at this stage. But just remember, the cells are dividing while they took that picture. And similarly, for eukaryotic system, there exists the genetic material called DNA as well, but not enclosed in the nucleus. So this is the typical picture which we should be able to distinguish between a prokaryotic cells without the nucleus, without any membranous bounded structures, and a eukaryotic cells with a defined nucleus and with the membranous bounded structures like mitochondria, like endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi complex, and some others. Okay. Let's start with the different parts of the cells. The first part of the cells we are studying is the cell wall. As I told you, the cell wall is only present in the plant cells and in the fungus. The plural is fungi. And also it is present in bacteria. It is the outermost boundary, very rigid and supportive layer. It is made up of a carbohydrate, and that carbohydrate is called as cellulose. It's a polysaccharide. It is made up of large number of small repeating units, and those repeating units are glucose. They're different glucose, but they are small units of glucose which combine to make long threads, and these long threads are present in a crisscross manner to create the cell wall. And the cell wall is only present within the plant cells. It is responsible for the shape of the cell. And usually, typically, when the cell dies, most of the components of the cells are gone, but the cell wall exists, it survives, and that eventually converted into the wood. The wood which you see in the trees, they are the remains of the cells. Mostly they are cellulose. Okay, the cell wall is mainly made up of cellulose. Another thing you need to remember, the fungi, they also contains the cell wall, but the cell wall of the fungus is made up of chitin. It's another material. Cellulose is a carbohydrate, a polysaccharide. Chitin is a different thing. And bacterial cell wall is made up of peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan is another type of molecule. The word peptido means it comes from protein, and the word glycan means it comes from the carbohydrate. So glycoproteins or peptidoglycan means something which is made up of proteins and carbohydrate. Okay, and then further, the animal cells do not have any cell walls, and when we eat plants and fresh vegetables and green leaves, they are made up of plant cells. They contain cellulose as well, and we don't have any means to consume the cellulose. So sometimes people wonder that if we cannot consume cellulose, then why we need to have it? So these are called as fibers. You might heard that term, the fiber present in the food. It is the non-digestible portion of the food, and it helps in the movement of the bowel. It helps in the movement of the bowel movement. So if the food contains lots of cellulose, it will be easier for the food to travel within the digestive system. And most of us who are having difficulty in the traveling of the food into their digestive system is because of the absence of lots of fiber in the food. So that's why it's very important part. It's not digestible, but it helps the food to move within the gut. Okay. The next is the cell membrane. The cell membrane is the protective barrier outside the cells, and it serves many purposes. It is made up of two things. The one is the lipid, the other one are the proteins. So the cell membrane is made up of lipids as well as the protein. And these lipids and proteins, they are together, they are called as lipoproteins. Particularly the lipids, they are present in two layers, and that is why cell membrane is typically referred as lipid bilayer. It also contains proteins which serve different purposes. It defines the cell's perimeter, cell shape, and it controls the transport of material across the cell. It's very critical and very important function of the cells. It controls how much water should be transported within the cell or outside the cell, how the waste products will be excreted outside the cells, and how other nutrients can be transported within the cells. There are definite mechanisms which defines the flow of these things in and outside the cell, into and outside the cell. Okay. So let's see the structure of those molecules like lipids and proteins, which are contributing to make cell membranes. Okay. As I told you that it is made up of two layers of the lipids. That is why it is called as the bilayer. Let me switch to the writing mode. This is my makeshift writing mode to tell you, to explain you about the lipid bilayer. There exist two types of, there exist two layers of those lipid molecules. And lipid molecules, remember, they are very big molecules, long molecules. So thematically, you can draw them like this. Very long and big molecules like this. The one part of the long, big lipid molecule is hydrophilic in nature. Hydrophilic in nature. What that mean? Hydrophilic mean water loving. It's called water loving part of the lipid. Lipid is one type of macromolecule involved in the creation of life. The other part of that lipid is made up of long organic chains, long chains of organic part. It is insoluble in water. It actually repels the water. That portion which is water repelling, non-polar in nature, it is called as hydrophobic. This part is hydrophobic. So one lipid molecule is made up of two ends, the hydrophilic, the other one is hydrophobic. When these two layers are present together, when the lipid molecules are present together in a solution, naturally the hydrophobic ends, the water repelling ends, they attract each other, because it's the law of nature for the solubility that likes like. Similar things dissolve in the similar things. So the lipid molecules arrange in two layers with their hydrophobic tails attracting each other, making it a double layer, while the hydrophilic ends are present in the periphery, outside. So for example, if this is the cell, then this is the outer boundary of the cells, the outer side, and this is the inner side of the cells. The outer and inner side of the cells, they are hydrophilic in nature. They can attract water, they are water soluble. While the hydrophobic nature lives right within, right inside of the lipid bilayer. That makes this thing very unique. And this is a very loose arrangement of the lipid molecules. That's why it's like floating. It's like moving, like floating. And this model of the cell membrane is called as fluid mosaic model. This is called fluid mosaic model. If you can see, if you can imagine the lipid bilayer, it is like a fluid, and it carries lots of protein molecules. Some are present on the surface. This is supposed to be a protein molecule present on the surface. So it is like the beads, the proteins are like the beads, like the mosaics present on this liquid fluid layer. So that is why it is called as fluid mosaic model. So somebody asks you the chemical constituents of the cell membrane. It is made up of lipids as well as the proteins. The lipid bilayer acts as a barrier. The proteins present on the cell membrane execute certain important functions, like they are involved in the transportation of material across the cell membrane. Okay, let's go back quickly to the, be brave, okay? So the cell membrane is made up of two layers of lipids, hydrophilic ends and hydrophobic ends. And specifically, I should tell you that this type, the lipid which is involved in the creation of cell membrane, is a phospholipid. It's a phosphoric acid containing lipid, phosphoric acid, okay? And this lipid bilayer membrane is present everywhere within the cell, wherever you heard the term membrane. So cell membrane, the membrane is made up of this particular thing. It's a universal structure. you will see that the nucleus is made up of double layer. So that means that double membranous nucleus is a double membranous bounded structure, and that membrane is made up of the lipid bilayer. Endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, mitochondria, all are membranous bounded structure, and the membrane present on them is the lipid membrane. So it's like a constant thing present in all different types of organelles as well. The next is the cytoskeleton. It's like the skeleton of the cell. Okay, here we go. The cytoskeleton is responsible for the very much survival of the cells. It's a network of structural proteins. They provide support to protect the cells from collapsing, and it also provides space for the organelles to exist within the cytoplasm, as well as it helps in the movement of different organelles within the cytoplasm. There are three main types of proteins which constitute the cytoskeletons. They are like hollow tubes and like fibers. They are stringy proteins, and they are also present in the muscles as well. So without these proteins, cells do not exist in its shape at all. So they are responsible to create the space for the other organelles to exist. Okay, their job is to keep the cells intact, and they are also very much important for the survival of the cells. Without cytoskeleton protein, cells do not exist, can't exist actually. And here comes the most famous organelle of the cells. It's called nucleus. It's a double membranous bounded structure that contains the DNA. It's a genetic material, the deoxyribonucleic acid. And this is the thing which carries all the information about the life, about the nature of cells, and how to execute different functions. They are bound by two membranes, the inner membrane and the outer membrane. They're present only in the eukaryotic organisms, like in animals and in plants. DNA contains information about proteins, about protein synthesis, and then the proteins carry out the cellular functions. The nucleus also contains certain pores and holes through which it transports different materials across the nucleus into the cytoplasm. There are certain small organelles present within the nucleus which are called as nucleolus. The most important line on this slide is that DNA contains information about the protein synthesis. Apart from the structure, which is quite easy, I want you people to ponder more on that concept, that how DNA can execute a certain function. So, like for this, every nucleus contains the DNA. And remember, DNA is a thread-like structure. We have studied in another lecture about the DNA. It's a thread-like structure. And that fiber or that thread is made up of 4 alphabets called nucleotides. The adenine nucleotides referred as A, the thymine nucleotide referred as T, the cytosine nucleotide referred as C, and the guanine nucleotide referred as G. These alphabets and the sequence, the number and sequence of these alphabet defines that what type of RNA will be produced. So the DNA produce RNA. What type of RNA will be produced? It depends from which part of DNA is used to create that RNA. The process of creation of that RNA is called as the transcription. It's called as transcription. Once the RNA is created, more specifically, it is called as mRNA or messenger RNA, because it takes the message from the DNA. There are lots of different types of messenger RNA coming out from the DNA. That's why we have lots of different types of messenger RNA. That messenger RNA, each messenger RNA is then translated with the help of translational machinery to produce the proteins. The proteins are the functional components present within the cell. So that means one protein means one particular function. And the DNA which is present within the nucleus, as I told earlier, if I didn't, then I'm telling it now, that the DNA present within the nucleus controls all the functions of life. And that is how the DNA can control the function of life, that DNA produces messenger RNA, and then these messenger RNA are translated into the proteins. The creation of protein from the messenger RNA is called as translation. So once the protein is there, the function will be executed. So the function of a cell is executed through proteins, and the proteins will be created through different types of messenger RNA produced by the DNA. So that is how the nucleus can control the functions of the cells. So this is something which you need to remember a lot. Okay, so then further, let's move to the next slide from the nucleus, that is the ribosomes.